رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So alhamdulillah, we have reached to halaqa 16 and we're continuing with the detriments of the tongue, which is a very huge topic and very, very critical, and hopefully we'll wind up what we need to say about that today. So here the last bahth that is mentioned in Minhaj al-Abidin, I'm sorry, Minhaj al-Qasidin, is mistakes in the articulation in religious matters. In other words, other things, this is a kind of a obscure concept, but it's not really, but it might at the outset appear to be, but it's not really. But previously we were talking about things that everybody, pretty much, can, they know about or they've heard about, like riba, backbiting, telling lies, etc. Now this is a very delicate matter here. So here is not only what we're saying, but how we say it. So if we don't understand, the proper use of words, we might use words in such a way, particularly when we're articulating religious concepts, which is not to be undertaken except people who are qualified to do so. So you can end up with huge blunders, particularly in this age of the internet, everybody, is expressing their own little views on matters. So only the ulama well versed in the intricacies of the language are capable of proper articulation. We're talking about belief, we're talking about aqaid, we're talking about belief about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Rasul, the unseen world, etc. Or even in matters of, of Islamic law, Sharia. So the articulation of these things require not only an understanding of the basic knowledge itself, but the usage of the Arabic language, which in itself is a very delicate, a very intricate science. So the discourse of those deficient in general knowledge, general knowledge of deen, and the intricacies of the Arabic language in particular, will not be free of pitfalls and blunders. Okay? Which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His mercy may forgive, but they didn't intend to do so. But even those who are perhaps well-grounded in knowledge, but they are not well-grounded in the language, or well-grounded enough, sometimes there's deficiency in articulation, which probably all of us are guilty to some degree. And those who are not qualified in knowledge shouldn't be talking about these things in the first place, which we're going to talk about at the very end of our discussion today. So some examples of that. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Nabi alayhi salam says, no one should say in Arabic, it makes much more sense, or it's much more identifiable, and that is, no one should say, ma sha'Allahu wa shit. In other words, whatever Allah and you want. In other words, whatever you want us to do, or whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides, or whatever He wants, So what's wrong with that? Ati Allah wa ati Rasul. Obey Allah and obey His Rasul, right? So what's the deal? The deal is that ma sha'Allahu wa shi'ta. So we are using wow here, conjunction of and, by saying whatever you, so it's kind of like making a sort of an equality between the two, iradats. How would you say iradat? The two wills. In other words, what Allah and His Rasul want. So it's kind of like making them on the same level. And they're not on the same level, because what Allah, Nabi ﷺ doesn't say except what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala informs him to say. So it's what Allah wants, and then thumma ma shi'ta. And then after that, what Nabi ﷺ wants. Is that understood? So it doesn't, to the common person, he wouldn't see anything, any discrepancy in that. But Rasulullah pointed out these things, you see. So you have to be critical in articulation, even though it's not, this is not going to be a major sin, but it is going to be, something which is that should be understood and should be taken care of. Okay, another example. There was a khatib who said, "Man yuti Allah," and we hear this in the khutbah every time, right? "Man yuti Allah wa rasuluhu," right? وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولُهُ, right? So whoever obeys Allah and His Rasul, whoever disobeys Allah and His Rasul, so who obeys, obviously, then he's on guidance. And whoever disobeys Allah and His Rasul, he's on misguidance. So here again, the khatib here said, وَمَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا, rather than saying, وَمَنْ يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولُهُ. مَنْ يَعْصِهِمَا, who disobeys them too. Yani Allah and His Rasul. So again, we have put Nabi Sallallahu obedience and Allah's obedience on the same level. Although the person who wasn't really cognizant of that, even this khatib who was an Arab, and he was, from the time of Nabi, so I need a companion, but, right? So he didn't take note of that delicate point, right? So, Nabi Sallallahu corrected him. He says, "Bi'sal khatib anta." What a bad khatib you are. And what did he do wrong? He just made this little slight blunder in articulation. Okay? So this gives us an idea of how critical it is how we articulate things. And this always happens, Somebody, I didn't mean that. How many times you've heard that? Somebody took it the other way and somebody understood other than what the person was articulating. So correctness and clearness, clarity and articulation is very critical. Okay. And another thing, this is very interesting also, that Nabi Sallallahu, because as we mentioned, and as you know, at that time up until very recently, the institution of slavery was going on everywhere. Of course, we talked about that, and we need to actually have a session to explain what is slavery in Islam. It's not, the same thing as what you've got, in the Western world, in the colonialists type of slavery and all that. In any case, so people had slaves, men and women. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, don't say, yani ha abdi wa amati. Abdi, yani my slave boy, my slave man, or my amati, my slave woman or girl. But rather say, khulami wa jariyati. In other words, call him your boy, like your son, or like your daughter. This is my girl, like my daughter. And that's actually would be the ultimate outcome. So even very early on, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam wanted to, wash the minds of this mentality that, people, are higher, and this is the as we say, the mamluk, or the people who were in the yoke of slavery. They were like they were a sub-citizen, or they were subhuman. The fact of the matter was, in Islam, as we've mentioned probably more than once, in Islam, the objective, or the only possible way in which a human being can become a slave of another is when Muslims are fighting with non-Muslims and the non-Muslims are caught in battle. So now the Imam has the option, he has several options. One of the options is to distribute them as slaves to other Muslims. So these women and children will go as slaves into the house of the Muslims, and actually the objective is not to make them, property of the people, but rather create a situation for these people who were fighting with Allah and His Rasul and were, very adamant into going into the hellfire, giving them a chance, even, as we say in Arabic, ala ragmi unufihim, on their nose, Bring them into a house of a Muslim, treat him like your son, treat him like your daughter, feed them like you eat, clothe them like you, and basically, for all practical purposes, they are captive members of your family until they accept Islam, or they, show signs of goodness, and then the Quran instructs them, and if you find khair in them, release them. And generally it used to happen that not only release them, give them from your money, get them set up, marry them to your daughters or your sons, whatever the case may be. And this is how it used to go. So it was actually a means of bringing people who otherwise would never have entered into Islam, who, by a long process, they actually entered Islam. In any case, so Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave this instruction, don't call them your slave. Nobody was saying things like that at that time. Nobody was saying something like that 500 years ago, 300 years ago, right? So don't call them by this name. So again, articulation, right? This is very interesting. Ibrahim al-Nakhai, rahimahullah tabarak wa ta'ala, who was the teacher of Abu Hanifa. He was a great muhaddith and great faqih, great imam of Muslimin. So he says, if a man calls another man, oh donkey, oh you donkey, oh you pig, oh you dog, or something like that, right? So it will be said to him on the day of judgment, did you perceive that I created him a donkey? Or did you perceive that I created him a pig? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created him a human being, and you're saying, oh you donkey, or you pig. So that is like a direct conflict with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. I mean, with the fact that He created him, whatever, and you're calling him, such type of names, right? Allah give us, give us guidance. People do things like this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala excuse us all. Okay, there are but a few of unlimited examples. These are a few but unlimited examples of what may fall advertently or inadvertently into speech if we don't understand articulation, if we're not cognizant of what we're saying. So not only different types of things that we should not say, or different types of areas we're not supposed to, but even the choice of words that we take. It's very critical, And this is true, in all of our relationships with people. So, who ponders over what has been presented here from the detriments of speech should have realized that who lets loose his tongue unrestrained will definitely not come out unscathed. If you just let your tongue, whatever you feel like saying, just say it, just do it. No, think, then speak. And say, okay. Now, again, I think our presentation got messed up here. Okay, also, abstain from questioning about sifat, characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Particularly, among the awam, the general, of course, among students of religion, among ulama, these are discussions that take place, but among the these are very delicate matters. They're very, as we say, ghawamid. They're very sort of deep, and they're not things which the common people are going to be able to understand, and probably they'll understand them wrongly. And it was said rightly. Probably it was Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud or other. He says, you will not be talking to a people. ما أنت بمحدث قوما لا تبلغ عقولهم كلامك. In other words, their intelligence level or their education level in terms of religious knowledge or whatever doesn't reach the level on which you're speaking about. إِلَا أَن يَكُونَ لِبَعْضِهِمْ fitna. It'll become a fitna. And, rather than being helpful for them, it'll be detrimental. Then it'll put doubts or, wrong ideas in their head. They'll misperceive, and it will be a big tribulation, travail for them. So, abstain from questioning about the sifat, the characteristics of Allah. Whatever the characteristics of Allah is mentioned, the basic, very clear meaning that we can understand as human beings, and then explain that to them, and it's more than sufficient. Satan beguiles the layman into thinking they're dabbling in ilm, makes them ulama. Now this is really relevant today. This is really relevant today. I mean, it was relevant anytime. But specifically now, where all you just is all kinds of nonsense is just a click away, right? Shake Google, but get on there and you can get into all of this kind of, trouble, And so I'm sure, there's a very interesting concept how the internet, I'll just give you a clue, you can do your own research. But there's a very interesting, theory, how the internet all came about in the first place. Since we see about 99.9% of it is, taking people totally out, destructing human beings, families, minds, hearts, etc. And, a little bit is perhaps, beneficial. So who's behind all of that in the first place? I'll give you one guess. Huh? So Satan beguiles the layman into thinking, again, spelling errors, sorry about that. So Satan beguiles the layman into thinking that they're dabbling in ilm, makes them ulama. They learn the jargon, they go on the internet and learn a few words about usul and words about aqidah and, ready to go. You got your English translation of Bukhari and your English translation of Quran and, you're a mufti, you're a Shaykh al-Islam and, good to go. Whatever you want to know, we got it. Just Google it. So this is really this is really a huge trauma, you know. Uh, Previously, the classical works of Deen were not even translated into any other languages except Arabic. So if you wanted to enter into this field, first of all, you had to have proper training in the Arabic language itself, which takes years, you know. And then sequentially, you go through the whole, syllabus and curriculum. And then ultimately, you start, looking into the delicate meanings of Quran and Sunnah, the delicate issues of belief, aqaid, etc. So now you just click it, and now you get into these, stuff that students of religion wouldn't, even be hearing about until maybe the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th year of their studies. And now we've got a guy right off the street, just clicks in, and now he starts, and then he'll, and so Shaitan, hey, just go ahead, argue, debate, come on, you get the tools, you know as much as he does, and it's a big problem, okay? And now what happens is it doesn't stop there. So Shaitan continues this beguilement until his client, this is my jargon, because, those who buy into Shaitan's machinations, they're like his clients, right? So he says, so he goes on, mentoring him and all in this kind of thing until ultimately this person ends up saying things which end up becoming kufr. It's interesting, that if you look historically, if you do a little study, first of all, we have the people who say that, we just need the Quran and Sunnah. We don't need to listen to anybody. We just take the Quran and Sunnah and we just understand it and just act on it. We don't need anybody to tell us about it. It's right there in front of us, right? Might have heard that. So then it doesn't stop there. So in other words, we don't need ulama. We don't need specialists. Like I'm gonna go in and start and do my own open heart surgery, or my friend Dalen here. You need an open heart surgery? No problem. Let's Google it. There must be a YouTube tutorial. And are you ready for that? Come on, It's going to show us step by step. He's going to walk us right through it. Are you ready to put you? So if he were to, let me do that, the maximum that could happen, the guy is going to die. Now, if we start messing around with our deen and we mess up our belief sets and we mess up our, understanding, it's not you're just going to die. You're going to die, and then you're going to face, retribution, which might be eternal. Eternal damnation is at stake here, So it's a very serious issue, right? So similarly, so what happens is that people, we don't need ulama, we don't need these people. We have Quran and Sunnah. You don't even know the Arabic language. That's all right. We've got translations. Okay. So then what happens is, and by the way, Allah's in charge, not Muhammad. So why do we need this Sunnah? Besides, it's all this Sunnah. We don't know what's right, wrong. It's all made up. Who knows? I believe it. Just take the Quran. And then it goes on and on. And then ultimately, we don't even need Quran. All you need is just love God. That's fine. That's all you need. So that's how it goes. So Satan incrementally just and it starts with our belittlement of the religious scholars, and then it ultimately ends up with the Rasul, and then oh, wait a minute, who can even prove that even God exists? So so we find the people who move it on this track, sometimes they end up totally atheists, and it's not uncommon. So this is the trick of Shaitan, Talbis Iblis, the trickery of Satan, okay? So, عن أبي هريرة رضي الله تعالى عنه قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يزال الناس يتساءلون حتى يقال هذا خلق الله وهذا خلق الله فمن خلق الله من وجد من ذلك شيئا فليقول آمنت بالله ورسله متفق عليه. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned that this is actually going to happen. People will continue to ask one another questions. So somebody says, okay, Allah created all the things, so who created Allah? Right? So whoever comes across anything of that nature, what should he do? Go into, Plato and Aristotle and, try and find a philosophical, answer to the question. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave us the prescription. Forget about that. Just say, I believe in Allah and His messengers. Amantu billahi wa rasuli. Right? I believe in Allah and His Rasul. There's things which the human being can comprehend. There are things which are beyond the comprehension. There's one thing which is against logic. There's another thing which is above logic. The creator of the universe, we can't even understand the universe, as it were. So how are we going to understand the creator and that he's always been and his total and unlimited characteristics? That's above and beyond, the capability of the human intellect, which, by the way, is quite small comparatively. Okay? So questions of the general public on obscure matters of religion, particularly belief, are the most serious of detriment. These are the biggest problems, that we can get into. So delving in matters regarding the sifat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are destructive, not constructive. Therefore, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He sees, He hears, He speaks to His prophets, He's upon the throne, we don't understand it. We understand that it is not in such a way that the creation also are characterized by these characteristics. But these are characteristics of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we believe in them as He has expressed. What is the nature of that? That's beyond our ability to comprehend. Bas, that's sufficient. Okay? So the wajib, or the requirement of the religion, is to accept the apparent meanings of the Quran and surrender to what was brought by the Prophet ﷺ and engage in worship, etc. Okay? So the exploration and the inquiry of the general public on delicate and intricate matters of ilm, religious knowledge, is like raising animals and crying about the mysteries of the kingdom. I don't know if they could follow that one. Right? So the general public asking about things which are totally above and beyond their, their scope are like, the grazing animals on the king's pastures. They say, well, what's the king into, by the way? What are the mysteries of the kingdom, and what are all the intricacies that the kings, have to engage in? So it's beyond their scope, So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us understanding. And again, so who ponders over what has been presented here from the detriments of speech should have realized that who lets loose his tongue unrestrained will definitely not come out unscathed. So therefore, just to recap kind of, do we have a few more minutes? Yeah? So just kind of to recap all of what we've discussed. So basically what it boils down to, we want to be very careful in the use of our tongue. Okay? So on Abdullah ibn Amr radiallahu anhu, قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من صمت نجا. So basically it means who keeps quiet, he's going to make it. He's safe. Okay? And then Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam also mentions, من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فليقل خيرا أو ليصمت. So this is the khula. All this, several weeks of, this is the culmination of all of that, and it encompasses all of that. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, who believes in Allah on the last day, let him say what is good, or let him keep quiet. Okay? Muttafaqun alayh. So in sort of explanation to keeping quiet or speaking what is good, so we're going to quote some of our ulama. First of all, Ibn Abdul Barr rahimahullah ta'ala, the very great Maliki faqih and mufassir and muhaddith rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, Al-kalam bil-khair min dhikrillah wa tilawat al-Quran wa a'mal al-birr afdalu min as-samt. So he says that speaking things which are good, dhikrullah obviously, tilawat al-Quran, and any good actions, that's better than keeping quiet. It's just like, having good friends who encourage you in good things is better than solitude. And solitude is better than bad friends or bad company. So similarly, speaking good things, if you have something good to say, if you have dhikrullah, you have tilawat al-Quran, these are better than keeping quiet, obviously. This is a positive, and that's keeping quiet is basically a negative, in the sense that you're not gaining anything except safety. Okay? وكذلك القول بالحق كله والإصلاح بين الناس وما كان مثله. So Also, saying some truthful word, and inviting towards righteousness and speaking the truth and upholding it, and also making, reconciliation between people and things of that nature. Obviously, this is where you would use your tongue and use speech in a beneficial way. وإنما الصمت المحمود الصمت عن الباطل. So keeping quiet, which is praiseworthy, is to keep quiet, which is false, which is wrong, which is evil. And that was the long explanation of all of that we've been talking about for the past several weeks. So that's in this book of Tamheed. Okay. Lastly, Al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala encapsulate all of the teachings that we've basically been talking about. So he says, فإن قلت فهذا الفضل الكبير للصمت ما سببه من صمت نجا. So Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, who keeps quiet, he's safe. He's in safety. He made it. So why does it have, so keeping quiet, why does it have such a big virtue? So he says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّ سَبَبُهُ كَثْرَةُ آفَاتِ اللِّسَانِ. So he says that the reason for that, having such a big virtue, is because of so many detriments of the tongue. And we've been talking about that for almost a month or more. Okay? من الخطأ والكذب والغيبة والنميمة والرياء والنفاق والفحش والمراء والتزكية النفس والخوض في الباطل والخصومة والفضول والتحريف والزهادة والنقصان وإذاء الخلق وحتك العورات, to name, a number of them. So he says, so many afat, so many detriments of the lisan, like we just mentioned, mistakes advertently or inadvertently, or telling lies, backbiting, or spreading slander, or ostentatiousness, hypocrisy, fuhsh, filthy and lewd type of speech, wal mura, and arguing and debating, for the sake of, just for the sake of it, and tazkiyat an-nafs, and praising oneself and showing himself to be holier than thou, and wal khawd fil batil, and talking about, ridiculous things and wrong things and falsehood, and khusuma, disputes, and fudul, talking unnecessary talk, tahrif, and also twisting and twisting up things, as we mentioned in our last discussion, poor articulation or distortion in articulation, and adding something or leaving out something, or speech which is going to cause harm to others, and removing the curtain of as it were the curtain, or removing the cover over people's faults. So there's so many detriments. So if we keep quiet, we're going to be safe from all of these things. Okay? فهذه آفات كثيرة. These detriments are a lot. وهي سباقة إلى اللسان. And they just kind of, inadvertently, people just say these kind of things. لا تثقل عليه. It's very easy. It's not hard. ولها حلاوة في القلب. And, a lot of these things people actually enjoy, talking about other people and, all these kind of things. So also the nafs, along with the help of shaitan, they enjoy it. وَعَلَيْهَا بُعَاثًا مِنَ الطَّبْعِ. Even human nature sometimes promotes these kind of things, right? وَمِنَ الشَّيْطَانِ, and obviously shaitan is there to back up the whole process. وَالْخَائِدُ فِيهَا قَلَّ مَا يَقْدِرُ أَن يُمْسِكَ اللِّسَانَ. And it's very seldom that people have the wherewithal, from the knowledge standpoint and the discipline standpoint, to save themselves from, these slips, and to hold his tongue, when it needs to be held. فَيُطْلِقُهُ بِمَا يُحِبُّ وَيَكُفُّهُ عَمَّن لَا يُحِبُّ. So it's not possible for him just to, what he knows and he should be saying or what he shouldn't be saying. It's very difficult for him to actually control that and discipline himself towards doing that. فإن ذلك من غوامض العلم. That's from, very obscure and very delicate, intricate type of knowledge, to be able to understand all of these concepts and only speak in such a way that's going to be detrimental. Okay? كما سيأتي تفصيله. So this is mentioned in Ihya al-Ulumuddin, so he goes on explaining a lot of that later on in his book. So he says, فَفِي الْخَوْضِ خَطَرٌ. So entering into kalam or talking, there's danger. وَفِي الصَّمْتِ salama. And to keep quiet, there's safety. Okay? فَلِذَلِكَ عَظُمَتُ الْفَضِيلَةِ. Therefore, the virtue of keeping quiet is very grand and magnanimous. And therefore also, we find that the nature of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, in طول الصمت, he would remain silent for long periods of time. He wasn't just babbling on and on like we do, you know. And when he had something important to say, he would say it, and there would be jewels that would come out of his mouth, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. You know? So, هذا ما فيه من جمع الهم والدوام الوقار والفراغ للفكر والذكر والعبادة. That, so, you know, saving oneself from the risks and also the safety, apart from what one will, if we're not busy talking all the time, we'll be able to gather our conscience, we'll become, you know, focused on what we need to be focused on. Du'am al-waqar, and our dignity. Usually when people start talking, their dignity is also, you know, is also tarnished and it sort of dissipates. And farag lil fikr, and we'll be now free, since we're not exercising our tongue, now we can exercise our brains and our thinking and our reflection process for fikr, for thinking and reflection, dhikrullah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ibadah, you know, different forms of worship. وَالسَّلَامَةُ مِنْ تَبَعَاتِ الْقَوْلِ فِي الدُّنْيَا. And also, we'll be free from, you know, being taken account for all of our, you know, entering into talk of the world and the worldly things, which in itself is a big enough detriment. And we're going to talk about later on in the Dhamm ad-Dunya, talk about, you know, the love and the concern for the world. So usually the talk is usually concerning these things. So if we talk a lot about the world, then also the concern for it and the love for it and the desire to acquire it, it goes on, you know, increasing. وَمِنْ حِسَابِهِ فِي الْآخِرَةِ. And also will be spared from the, you know, the accountability for what we've been saying in the hereafter. قَدْ قَالَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى مَا يَلْفِظُ مِنْ قَوْلٍ إِلَّا لَدَيْهِ رَقِيبٌ عَتِيدٌ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us in Surah Qaf, he doesn't speak a single word except he has Raqib Atid. He has the two angels who are writing down each and everything. Allah. So if we were cognizant of that, everything I'm saying, it's being written. And if you remember last time I mentioned in the khutbah also, our pious ancestors used to write down everything he used to say. And at the end of the day, he would look and see, is this for me or against me? And actually, he's just, you know, doing the exercise of what's actually going to come to play, because that's actually taking place anyway. And all of us have the scribes on the right and the left. And Allah give us cognizance and not, you know, and annoy them. Right? One of our policies is, with all this talk, you're really giving it taklif. You're really giving a hard time to this poor angel who's having to write down all of this nonsense that you're babbling, you know. Allah Akbar. فقد قال الله تعالى ما يلفظ من قول إلا لديه رقيب عتيد ويدلك على فضل لزوم الصمت أمر وهو. And another thing that will point to you, you know, this is kind of the summary. The Khulasa al-Ghazali is so, you know, just amazing in how he just summarizes things and presents them in such a very organized and understandable manner. So he ends this discussion, and we'll end our discussion here with this. He says there's a very important thing that will point to you, you know, the virtue and the you know, the high status of keeping quiet as, you know, as far as possible. And he says that kalam, in al-kalam arbatu aqsam, that speech is of four types. One is qismun huwa dararun ma. One type of speech, it's nothing but detriment. Wa qismun huwa nafun ma. And there is a type of speech which is nothing but benefit, like dhikrullah, tilawat al-Quran, things like that. Wa qismun fihi darar wa manfa. And there's also a third qism, which there's something, it has some benefit and it has some detriment. وَقِسْمٌ لَيْسَ فِيهِ ضَرَرٌ وَلَا مَنْفَعٌ. This is kind of like the quadrant system, you know, that they talk about in time management. It's similar to that. So you've got a quadrant here. So qismun, and the last qism is what? The variables between that are darar and nafa, so there's four, right? So the last qism is there's no darar, there's no harm, and there's no benefit. Okay, so how do we, you know, deal with these four these four categories. أما الذي هو الضرر المحض فلا بد من السكوت عنه. So as for that qism, which is nothing but detriment, what do we do with that? We don't. What do we do with it? We don't. We don't involve ourselves in that period. It's as in time management quadrant, you would say the Q4. You know, it's a no-go. Okay? وكذلك ما فيه ضرر ومنفعة لا تفي بالضرر. So we got something else, some type of something someone would like to say or could be said. It has detriment and it also has, however, some benefit. However, that benefit is not going to, you know, compensate for the detriment. So what do we do with that? Again, write it off. Okay? So, فهو فضول because okay, وكذلك ما في ضرر ومنفعة لا تفي بالضرر. وأما ما لا منفعة فيه ولا ضرر, and as for that which doesn't have any benefit, doesn't have any harm, فهو فضول. It's just a waste of time. It's just extra, nothing. You know. والاشتغال به تضييع الزمان وهو عين الخسران. So, to busy ourselves in these kind of things, this is what? This is just squandering away our time, and it is the essence of loss. And it sounds much better in Arabic, doesn't it? Huh? وهو عين, huh? والاشتغال به تضييع الزمان وهو عين الخسران. Okay. فلا يبقى إلى القسم الرابع. So what's left? Only one, which is beneficial period. فيه منفعة. So either it's detrimental or it's totally detrimental, totally beneficial. So that which is only beneficial. So he says, okay, we have only one qism. So three-fourths of whatever people talk about need to be thrown out, you know, from the very inception. So we're only left with about a quarter of what is possible to be spoken about. That's left. And that also needs very close consideration. فلا يبقى إلى قسم الرابع. So only the fourth section remains. وقد سقط ثلاثة أرباع الكلام. So three-fourths of what people talk about, that's already out of the question. وهذا الربع فيه خطر. And this fourth qism, or this fourth, you know, category, it also is dangerous. It's only good, but it's also dangerous. How is that? Because إذ يمتزج بما فيه إثم من دقائق الرياء والتصنع والغيبة وتزكية النفس وفضول الكلام وامتزاجا يخفي دركه فيكون الإنسان به مخاطرا. So, he says, because even though it's a good thing, for example, Amr bil Ma'ruf, Nahi anil Munkar, that's an order of Allah, right? Enjoin the good, forbid the evil, you know, invite people to khair, you know, give them good advice. The problem is that there's other elements that can enter into that. Like what? Like ostentatiousness, you know, people should, you know, I'm a great speaker, I'm really giving good advice, and people should appreciate me, and so I'm doing it to show people. The sanra, which is pretty much the same thing, basically. Ghiba, and you can digress into some sort of backbiting. Also, people discuss good things, but also there's a kind of flavor of, you know, putting myself on a more, you know, sort of highest level, or saying, well, I don't involve in such kind of things, you know, this is terrible. I would never think of doing that. Oh, you're so great, you're so holy, and you're so pious, you know? So all of these things can enter in, and also maybe extra. We're throwing in a lot of extra things, like probably I'm very guilty of that. Excuse me, all of us. Extra things that don't need to be said. So it's a waste of time. So, and this is a kind of merging of these elements which most people would not even be aware of it. So even in this instance, there is risk. In other words, we have to think very careful before we open our mouths and speak. And will give me and all of us tawfiq. فمن عرف دقائق آفات اللسان علم قطعا أن ما ذكره صلى الله عليه وسلم هو فصل الخطاب. So whoever understands, you know, the delicacy and the intricacy of these detriments of the tongue and speech, he understands definitely that whatever Rasulullah mentioned in that hadith, and samata najah, and someone in Najah. So he understands that this is the fasl khitab. This is the defining judgment. حيث قال من صمت النجاة. When he says, who keeps quiet, he is in safety. He made it. He escapes, you know. فلقد أوتي والله جواهر الحكم قطعا وجوامع الكلم. So Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam was given these jewels of wisdom and these comprehensive short statements. ولا يعرف ما تحت آحاد كلماته من بحار المعاني إلا خواص العلماء. And of course, nobody understands, you know, what is under the surface of the speech of Rasulullah from oceans of knowledge and understanding, except very, very, very erudite scholars of deen and scholars of the akhirat, whose minds and hearts have been purified. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, at least, may He make us among them, at least make us love them and aspire to be among them, inshallah. Say Ameen. Ameen. So, that's quite a heavy dosage and quite a lot to put on one's plate, and it will probably take a lifetime to digest that, if at all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. Any questions?
Predecessor that you mentioned would write down everything that he had said and look at it at the end of the day. Do you know his name?
Don't know. Probably wasn't even mentioned. Yeah. Possibly it could be you. So you could do that. Okay, anything else?
You said, say, so in the khutbah,
Yeah.
when Khatib says, وَمَن يَعْصِ مَا
مَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ.
better to say, وَمَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ.
Yeah. مَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ, rather than saying مَن يَعْصِهِمَا. Although that has also been narrated, you know. Khutbah. Yeah. Sometimes people say it, but it's better to say, this hadith is there, it's a sahih hadith. مَن يَعْصِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ غَوَى. That's better. Yeah. There's a dua, you see, which Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was teaching with Sahabi. Amantu bi kitab alladhi arsalt wa nabiy alladhi arsalt. So the fellow said, wa Rasul alladhi no, nabiy alladhi arsalt. Because Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam mentioned Nabi and then Risala, Nabi and Rasul, where the fellow said, Rasul alladhi arsalt. No. So there's, even though it's very similar, but there is a difference, and there's because now we have Nubuwwat mentioned, we have Risalat mentioned, you know. So again, you know, delicate, you know, intricacies of the language, but they have, you know, in terms of meaning, it's not just, you know, sounding, it's actually the meaning that these words carry. So those who are aware of that, of those intricacies, they take close cognizance, and most of us who are not of that level, we don't pay heed, and as a result of that, we can get in trouble with what we say. Allah save us. So what's the cure? Keep quiet as far as possible. Right? Anything else? Allah give us all tawfiq. Jazakumullah khair for coming and joining, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq. And this is a very critical lessons, you know, and you know, these are really the practical lessons that, you know, on a daily, you know, we're always using our tongues, and so we really need to learn how to discipline them and use them for our benefit, not to our detriment. وبيا التوفيق. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.